But what's that? Yeah, this is our big one. And I will fit it into public policy because we do have some policies that cover self-care in a way, like preventative medicine. Are any of your parents old enough to get the vaccine yet? You know how they have different age groups to get the vaccine? My dad just got it last week because he's 75, and I forget the next age down. It probably goes down to like 65 and 55 and 45. You got to sign up on the public health website, and that's how you get like vaccinated for, I think it's probably funded by the government. I don't know.
How is he doing?
My dad, I'm terrified that he took the vaccine. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, how is he? Like,
He says he's okay, but they said most people are dying 2 weeks after they get the vaccine. Like if you look it up, and I sent him the info, he's like, oh, whatever, I'm going to die anyway.
crazy.
Yeah. So my mom says pray for him. She got COVID, so she is probably not going to need vaccines for a few months, or, you know. I'd like to have a few people get it first and then get it, you know what I mean? Like, the number one self-care there is to stay healthy. Do you guys know the list of vitamins that you should take for COVID? Have you heard this? The number one vitamin we actually get mostly in the summertime from the sun.
Oh.
Yes. So in the winter, we don't get enough vitamin D, and you can buy like the little gummies of vitamin D or chewables. So the three key vitamins are vitamin B, vitamin C, and vitamin D with zinc. I guess they say zinc cracks open the virus and kills it. And you can take elderberry, syrup or gummies, colloidal silver, and chaga mushrooms are antiviral. I take all of those, and then they test me every week at a hospice to make sure. Did you guys all have to get tested?
No.
How did that work? What was the deal with it?
We tested 7 days prior, like from 7 days to the day we came in that time frame. Then we got tested the second we came to school again. So for me, I took it 2 days before coming to school, and then I had to take it again immediately when I came.
And how much was that?
Mine was
Okay, they're at least giving free tests. I know some people are charging. I would hope they wouldn't charge you to come into school for. We used to get the PCR test at hospice. Now they're giving us the instant test. So like in 10 minutes, they're like, oh, you're negative. So self-care, you guys do anything for self-care?
Yes.
You would be willing to share possibly? Because that's kind of what we're going to go over here. It's whoever wants to go first.
meditation,
Mhm.
yoga, skincare.
Mm-hmm. What's that?
And it's about
The same you're saying?
Huh?
Or what did you say you do for self-care? I guess.
You didn't hear nothing?
No, I didn't hear it. I heard you say the same. That's my hearing is bad, so I will admit.
Meditate. Dang, I haven't been one word. Meditation, yoga,
Mm-hmm.
skincare routine, and I take vitamins.
Okay. Anybody else?
I absolutely love to draw. I have anxiety and depression, so drawing just helps me extremely. I like to walk my dog for about an hour, 2 hours a day. I was at home.
Okay. How far away do you live from?
45 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start off with self-care. If you guys think of anything you do or that you want to do deeper in the presentation, because we already finished chapter 2 on the Tuesday class anyway, and I always try to open up. If you have me in class, I will always talk about self-care. It's easier to talk about self-care than to do self-care, so maybe that's why I talk about it so much. But if you don't do it, in social work, we have something called burnout. It's more likely to experience burnout without taking care of self. And then the book we created this PowerPoint for graduate school. So this was one of our projects to present to the class, but we found this quote about self-care, and it's losing sight of the self. So in the theater of life, the other becomes the illuminated part of the stage. Our I is outside of illumination. The lives of others, their hopes, ideas, goals, and aspirations, pains, fears, and despair, anger are in focus like a leaf under the microscope. We see all this in highly illuminated detail as a counseling, therapy, teaching, or social worker or health practitioner. The other gets our attention. We're always focused on our clients. And in a lot of jobs, like you want to keep your clients happy. Out of the illuminated microscope, we easily lose sight of our own needs, like the needs to not respond to all needs. And so basically, I know it's a long way of saying it. It's like you can't take care of others until you take care of yourself. And so no matter what profession you're in, like I can't go and serve my clients at my job if it is IT, education, criminal justice, social work, if I'm already burnt out, like if I've already worked 50 hours a week. That's kind of why they started the 40-hour week to begin with, because they knew that's, the daylight hours where people you go over that sometimes it's okay. But if you're always working 50, 60, and 70-hour weeks, you're going to crash and burn. And I've experienced that before because it's, when you're in graduate school and working full time, it's easy to burn out. So in the presentation, we'll cover secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, burnout, stressors, self-care, and how to do self-care. We call it emptying your cup and then nurturing yourself. So let me make sure this is recording for people online. Okay. So in social work and especially the helping professions, I would imagine even IT could be included into the helping professions because you're getting in there. People are always freaking out about their computer and access to data. I remember as a social worker at Lighthouse, we'd always have systems crash. And we're like, dude, where's the IT guy? We need some help right now. And it was always panicky. So you can experience this secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue. So secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, it's a set of symptoms that may occur in individuals experience trauma or crisis. The symptoms mirror that of post-traumatic stress disorder, so PTSD, which we used to only diagnose veterans with this in the 70s and 80s, but now we actually have expanded PTSD diagnosis in the DSM-5 to include children and adolescents that have experienced a trauma. Symptoms include re-experiencing flashbacks, nightmares, arousal like anxiety and hyperactivity, and then avoidance, like either numbing or dissociation. So here's some of I hope it's big enough for you guys. The symptoms you might experience, and this is again, if you don't do self-care and you burn yourself out. So these are all avoidable, but if you don't do it and you overwork yourself, it's easy to experience all of these. Persistent arousal, avoidance, numbing of reminders of the traumatic events, intrusive thoughts or images of your clients or your own traumatic experiences, difficulty separating work from your personal life, lowered frustration tolerance, like you just get annoyed really easily, depression, assumptive world disturbances, ineffective or self-destructive, self-soothing behavior, so that would be like drinking and smoking every single night to go to bed, hypervigilance, decreased feelings of work competence, diminished sense of purpose or enjoyment in one's major or your career, loss of hope, helplessness, and confusion. So all that is considered burnout and can be avoided with self-care. While compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress occurs when people living with others experience trauma, burnout refers to exhaustion from emotionally demanding work. So again, if you're doing too much at work, we were talking before class, some of you mentioned working at hospice would be a hard job. That's what I do on the weekends. Once a month I'm on call and I have to sit with somebody who's dying. And that's so nobody dies alone is kind of where we view that. And if we're doing that too much, if I was doing that every weekend and trying to teach, I couldn't, but I do it about once a month. I'm on call overnight so that everybody has somebody sitting with them while they're passing away. People who are burned out will experience depleted energy and decreased effectiveness. So we're kind of worse at our jobs when we're not awake, healthy, sleeping enough, eating enough good, healthy foods and whatnot. So here's some burnout symptoms. People experiencing burnout may have the following symptoms: negative self-concept and attitudes towards work or school, etc. Boredom, errors, and accidents, like in social work, usually with paperwork, that can happen. Impatience or irritability, maybe even with your boss if they're having you do too much. Physical depletion, like tiredness, pain, headaches, and illness. Feelings of helplessness or hopelessness. Withdrawing from relationships, and then isolation, even grandiosity, like if some people experience burnout that way. And here's some of the things that could make it worse. So the poor self-care deadly dozen, like if you notice any of these at your work or job or school, make sure to do the self-care. So toxic friends and colleague support could lead to the deadly dozen. If you have too little fun, like playfulness and humor and laughing are important in life and in work. 3 is important: a fuzzy, inarticulated understanding of your own needs. So like not knowing, especially at work, what you have to do and how many hours you have to get it done. Like if you're always on call or you don't know you have a 9 to 5 schedule, but when you have the contract of like the days you're working, the times you're working, and how to do the job, it's easier. And you negotiate that up front at like job interviews to make sure you're not going to get like a crappy job that works you all the time too much. No professional development process that turns experience into more competence and less anxiety. So in social work and probably in IT and education, any job, you'll get training. Like they will train you how to do things. So if they're not doing that professional development or training you how to do your job, it's easy to get overwhelmed by it, anxious, and then burnt out. So social workers have to get continuing education units. So that's like 15 a year, as long as you hold your license. No energy giving personal life. So you got to make sure to get back into doing those yoga and drawing and things to take care of you. Inability to say no to unreasonable requests. We all have to learn how to say no at times. It's a hard thing to learn to do, but saying no is important. Vicarious traumatization that takes accumulated toll. Personal relationships that are predominantly one-way caring, with self as a giver. So a lot of times, especially when you finish school, you can get in the sandwich generation, they call it, where your parents are getting older, you're taking care of them, and now you're having kids and you're taking care of them. So there's no, you're sandwiched in between that burnout, not taking care of yourself. So just making sure to watch out for that. Constant perfectionism in work tasks, that can burn you out because none of us is perfect. We do make mistakes. It's okay. We just fix them. Continual unresolved, ambiguous professional losses, like if your bosses and supervisors are always leaving, need to watch out for that. Strong need to be needed, and then professional success defined solely by clients, students, or patient positive change. Right finance is a key to wellness too. So it's important to keep track of all your expenses and like financial obligations, because when you get your jobs in a few years, you'll write those things off. If you need to get mileage for driving to your job, you can get those. Because mismanagement of finances can quickly lead to unnecessary stress. Like if we're in debt quickly, like I took out way too many student loans. Just take what you need. Don't take out the $250,000 that gets you through graduate school if you don't need it. If you do need it, certainly. There are many sources of information found online and in your library about that. So getting towards now the solution part, this is a practice we call emptying the cup. So this is how you can do some understanding of self-care. So imagine yourself as the cup. You spend your workday hearing stories of others, being with them in their pain and in their joy. You also have your own stories, your own life, your own pain, your own joy. Eventually, your cup becomes full. Some days it is overflowing. You feel that you can't hear one more story of pain. You might snap at a loved one. You might feel like sleeping all day. Self-care is what you do to empty that cup, because when it's like full and overflowed, you just need to rest. It is critical that you do empty your cup every day so that you can re-engage in life and in your work in an effective and a healthy way. So here's a list. Some of you guys mentioned these. You already do these. See if I can make it bigger. I don't know. I guess I'll turn it off. Is that big enough? Okay. So you mentioned, I hate that it records what I say, but whatever. Take a long walk, meditate, pray, talk with a friend, listen to music, take a bath, play with animals, ride a bike, sit in the sun. I know it's cold out right now nowadays, but maybe even sitting in front of the window and taking time to be with yourself. Eat lunch outside, paint, look at the stars, garden, drink tea, dance, draw, journal, and cook, read, smell flowers, which I guess you have to go to like Kroger's or Walmart to smell flowers nowadays, like a greenhouse, jog, get a pedicure. Anywhere cheap to get a pedicure around here, or a manicure? They all expensive. That's what I was thinking. Probably Xenia. Is Xenia like even a big town at all? Like I've sometimes eaten there, but it seems kind of small. Just things to like experience self again, to take care of self. So do yoga, play soccer, lay in the grass, stretch, go to church or temple, play a game, and then laugh or swim. Do you guys have access to the pool here? As I know they had a swimming class last year. I always saw that. Like that was when you could register for swimming aerobics or something. So, okay. Let's see if I can get this to move. So these are the different dimensions of how nurturing yourself would be. This author mentioned several. So the emotional self, processing emotions and seeking therapy when necessary. Financial self, learning good financial management skills, particularly in a field where pay may be low at first, like when you're first out in the workforce, you're entry level and you work your way up kind of. Humorous self, learning to use humor appropriately in a workplace where serious and often painful issues are being dealt with. It's critical when humor is linked to resilience, especially with coping with the trauma. So there's a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and Viktor Frankl is about this. The loving self, developing and attending to genuine loving relationships, provide support. Empathetic people have a tendency to give love, taking care of others without focusing on getting love. The nutritious self, so listening to your body and developing good nutritional habits. I always say eat enough vegetables and drink enough water, which is probably the hardest thing for me to do. So I try to carry one of these things around and drink 4 a day if you can. And then playful self, having time free to enjoy and engage in playful activities. Priority setting self, managing your time. Identifying priorities and setting boundaries on work and play activities. And then recreational self, eating, engaging in a hobby that can provide stimulation and satisfaction. The relaxation or stress reduction self, combating over arousal. Your own reaction to crisis or stressful situations based on traumatic stress responses by developing a relaxation response. So learning breathing, which in meditation they do a lot. It can slow your heart rate down when you're stressed out. Taking the deep, full breaths that like fill up your whole lungs. Solitary self, so taking time to be alone and quiet. And then spiritual or religious self, attending personal beliefs that assist in making meaning of the world, often serve as a grounding force. So This one was a prayer they say to use in meditation, like in the Claremont Recovery Center I used to work at. This is a prayer from the 12 and 12 that they say to repeat it slowly for a meditation you would like to learn. It says, Lord, make me a channel of thy peace. Where there is hatred, I may bring love. Where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness. Where there is discord, I may bring harmony. Where there is error, I may bring truth. Where there is doubt, I may bring faith. Where there is despair, I may bring hope. Where there are shadows, I may bring light. That where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek to comfort rather than be comforted, to understand rather than be understood, to love rather than be loved. And it is by self-forgetting that one finds, by forgiving that one is forgiven, and by dying that one awakens to eternal life. So just like different ideas of meditation, there's other books on meditation you could buy on Amazon. Ideally, for the semester, you guys, I mentioned in one of them, like, what are your goals for the semester? But like setting up ways you can balance the physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual, to have like a balanced being. Then creating a personal care plan. When we're completely online, I have students do this, but you can like kind of think of things, and we can talk it out right now, things that you plan this semester to do to take care of yourself. If you guys have self-care stuff that you're doing, are there any other things? I know you guys mentioned a couple, but stuff you guys may do for self-care or want to do this semester, or ways to succeed. Sometimes just setting the goal to get through the semester. Make it through, finish all 5 or 6. Do you all have 5 or 6 classes? Everybody? So ways to prioritize each. I hate that it talks that way. Anybody else do any of these for self-care? Like, any you want to name out loud?
I get up and work out every morning.
Yeah.
To start the day off.
Exercise is a good one for sure. I tore my meniscus in my knee 2 months ago, or I found out I tore it 2 months ago. I don't know when it happened. So it's been harder. I used to run every day, and I've not been able to run now for like 2.5 months. So it's different. You got to change everything, around that. Try to drink more water and eat more vegetables, or do different stuff for exercise. Like I walk now instead of running. But I feel like an old man. Are these touchscreen? Nope. So any questions about the self-care stuff? Hopefully that can get you guys kind of going in the direction you want to, because I always say I wish that they had given us more of these things when we were in school. Maybe they did and offered them, and I just wasn't a taker. I'm like, oh, I'm good. I'm going to go out and have fun somewhere else because it's more fun to do whatever. So let's see here. Any questions about the chapter so far? Because we go real fast through like 1,000 years and then up to modern history by next month for sure. I guess even here we're into feudalism, the early Middle Ages, because we didn't have much social policy back then. It was just like every person for themselves. Even in the United States, they say they have evidence now in California of like a massacre in the 1100s of like an entire village of Native Americans that took out another village of Native Americans and just kind of like took everything of theirs. And, the lawlessness there and during the Middle Ages and the stuff that we're going through doesn't happen as often nowadays. But in a sense, there still are some areas of the world that lawlessness can go on. Not as many, but there certainly are still some. Some people say that we've become kind of like set up in America with like the debt problem. Does anybody here take out student loans? You guys have to take out loans? Okay. And I know in undergraduate, you can only do like 5 first year, 6 second year, 7,000 third year, and like 8 or 10,000 fourth year. So in undergrad, you can't get more than like 40 or 50,000 those first 4 years. But in graduate school, they give you $21,000 a year. So it's real easy to pile up. Like if you do 10 or 12 years of graduate school, it's real easy to stack it up real fast. And, they'll sell cars nowadays for a lot easier than they used to, because if you don't make that payment on the car, they can always come and repossess it. And then same with the house, like they'll approve you for a loan a little bit more than maybe you can afford, because if you don't make a payment on the house, they can come and, I guess it's called foreclosure on the house. So just making sure for self policy to not take on more than we need. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it is fun to get the fancier stuff or whatever. My wife talked me into getting her an SUV because we're having a second baby here real fast. And somehow I got the payment the same as what our Prius payment was last year. We had a plug-in Prius, and she's like, it only seated 4. She's like, dude, we ain't going to have 4 kids in a car or 2 kids and us in a car that seats 4. So I took that on, but we're stretched. You know what I mean? Like I got to work an extra job on the weekend. I got to work extra at the private practice. So going along with that theme of self-care, making sure to not overdo it. Some people call it voluntary simplicity. So dipping into chapter 3, though, this is the social values and social welfare. This is like England from the Middle Ages onward. So this is just kind of like history they were writing about feudalism. It was like from the 6th to the 10th century. So we're still like hundreds of years ago at this point. Hierarchy was created. Each person knew their place and responsibilities. So you still had like a king and stuff. Like I think there's some nations that have kings left, but not many. The time period was characterized by the manorial system of vassalage. You don't have to remember this terminology, but just getting the history down. Second phase of the Middle Ages was from like 11th century to the 14th century. So luckily we're booming again. We're almost getting up to modern times. But there's growth of population and expansion of cultivated areas, some technological process and market-oriented production. And if you guys know how many people lived in the world back then, or how many live in the world right now?
There's 7.5 billion.
That's right. So I found this one out recently, which was shocking to me. I don't know how many were in the Middle Ages, but I know my dad was born in 1945 and there was only 2 billion people. And that was like 80 years ago. Then when my sister was born in 71, there was like 3 billion people. I was born in 1978, there was 4 billion people. And my youngest sister was born in 1986, there's 5 billion people. My niece was born in 1997, and she just finished college. There was, at that point, 6 billion. So most recently we've surpassed, as we've got new medicine and new ways to keep people alive. We've got antibiotics. People used to die all the time at birth. We did not make it past birth because you die of an infection, stuff like that. But since the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, we've gone from 1 billion in the 1800s all the way up to 7-8 billion right now, which is crazy. So I'm guessing we had about 1 billion in the Middle Ages. I don't know for sure. I guess you could look that up. But we started having increased technical efficiency, improved administration, and increased pressure to transfer more of the surplus from producers to the lords. So the kings and all the people that owned everything. Late Middle Ages, the 14th and 15th centuries. So there's new towns arose. This is all around Europe. So do you guys have to take geography? I was always bad at geography. Knowing how far away Europe is from India and Africa and China is way in the east. But I'm pretty sure in Jesus' times, Jerusalem and all those places are not far from Egypt. You know, like you could walk from where the pharaohs were in Egypt and the Israelites running away to the Middle East and areas of Jerusalem and Pakistan and all that. Like they say Jesus walked as far away as India at one point in time. So we're like concentrated in the origins of the human in Africa and then Europe. And then I don't think, besides Native Americans in the U.S., there is nobody over here. So most of this is in England and overseas from here. So there was a decline in serfdom. We went from status to contracts. That was actually a pretty big move because before we had contracts, there was no way to kind of like buy and sell goods with like it documented. Contracts were the ways that we wrote up how that stuff was coming and how policy was made. Appearance of vagrants, transients, and migrants. There was a need that arose to take care of the population. So this is where the policy starts. Like you're seeing homeless people and transients and migrants running maybe from a hurricane, and they're like, we need to take care of these people, again, from like that spiritual obligation. Late Middle Ages to Elizabethan poor laws. So we had guilds, and those were voluntary and social associations of merchants and artisans. They functioned as mutual aid societies and charitable organizations for their own members. So in work and religion, we had this guy named Martin Luther. Has anybody ever heard of Martin Luther? So he actually founded the Protestant religions. So Martin Luther was alive in 1517 on Halloween. He hammered the 95 Theses to the church front doors. And basically he was complaining about the church, and that was called the 95 Thesis, the Protestant Reformation. So he was pissed that like the Pope took, people could give a bunch of money and then the Pope would say, okay, you're going to heaven. And people could like pay indulgences and weird stuff. He had 95 different things he was pissed off about. And he started from there. There was only one Christian religion until 1517. And then after 1518, there was two, then we had three. Now we have like 500 different Christian sects of religions. From Protestant to Baptist to Lutheran to Methodist to, I can't even name them all. So this challenged the foundations of Roman Catholicism, and the Protestant Reformation followed. And yeah, we had lots of different stuff going on in the church. It moved quickly. That's partly why people ran away from Europe then, because they were having religious persecution. They were being killed for whatever religion they practiced. So they took ships overseas to get away from it, was kind of the idea. Calvinism, one could serve God as well in the marketplace as in any other place. So this was kind of where work and religion intersected. They were saying work was a divine vocation and thus a religious activity. And the opposite, idleness and temptation, has distracted people from the pursuit of righteous living. So now in the 1600s, they had the Poor Laws. And again, this is just the history of social policy. We will get to the United States of America in the 1900s very quickly. So these unpaid officers were appointed to collect taxes, and you always hear about in the Bible the tax collectors. Spend the funds on poor relief, and then assign the work to able-bodied, and then apprentice the children of paupers. So like teaching the paupers' children different trades, carpentry, how to make a living. Also, the parishes were responsible to provide for the poor. So there was a tax levied on the occupiers of property, which we still have. So we still have to pay property tax. Does anybody hear your parents complain about taxes, or do you even complain about taxes ever? Like, you get your paycheck, and how much do they take out for taxes, for real? I think it's at least Social Security tax is 10% about. Say you make like 500, don't they take at least $50? or if you make 400, and we're supposed to get that back when we turn 65, but that's still a freaking long ways away. Like you're paying into the Social Security system for, hopefully right now your parents or grandparents can collect it at 62 is early collection, 65 you get that money back. They give you maybe like $1,000 a month if you like work so many years, or you get $2,000 a month if you were like in the top earners and paid the max into Social Security taxes. So hopefully, I'm hoping like my parents are getting it now, as I have a feeling that by the time we're 62 or 65, there won't be as much money. Hopefully there is. But the taxes are crazy. Then when you buy a house, you have to pay a property tax, and that pays for your public schools. And then I feel like even when you buy cars, they make you pay taxes nowadays. Anything you don't pay. Have you guys ever noticed the tax they take out on your stuff? And been like, what in the hell? I always get pissed, but I know it's supposed to be for the greater good. Like it's supposed to go and take care of, like, again, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And you really do have to make a large amount of money, because often we get a lot of that money back. Like you get your tax returns back and they'll give you some of it back. I think the only part they don't give you back is the Social Security tax, but like federal taxes, you'll probably get back. Because you have to make a certain amount. I don't even think I make enough to like not get a refund. I've gotten a refund every year of my life. Poor law compilation of 1601. So worthy poor were housed and provided a weekly provision. Notice the language there though too. They say worthy poor. Who's worthy and who's unworthy? It's kind of messed up. Poor children and children born out of wedlock or apprenticed. Laboring poor were given work, and then willfully idle were punished and forcefully employed. So that sounds like the beginnings of slavery. Like you're punished for being idle and you have to go do work, you know? So getting these ideas of like the just law and like how you are designed to work. Spin Hamled. This is when the cost of bread, the justices of the peace decided to pay subsidies to currently employed individuals and families instead of regulating wages. So it's starting to affect food, water, shelter, like a lot of the basic needs, and public policy is born. So we're kind of getting into the beginnings of public policy. There was a roundsman system that allowed pauper laborer to go from house to house seeking work. Like I still have guys that do that. They'll like post up that like I paint and I do handiwork, like call this number and we'll fix the outside of your house or we'll fix the inside of your house. Then also if work was provided, he received food for the day and a small wage, and parish paid a supplemental sum. So to put this, I know this is a lot of weird language, but to understand what's going on here, they say most people earned a dime, which was 1/10 of an ounce of silver. It was a dime a day. So 1/10 of an ounce of silver. Our money in the United States was silver until the year 1964. So a dime actually was a silver dime. We had a silver dollar. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. Anybody have parents that collect those old coins? Now they're worth like 10 or 15 times the face value. So yeah, money back then, and this would be like a day's wages right here. And it's laughable now. You're like, what? I got a dime? I got a dime to work all day long. I got a freaking dime. Well, a dime used to be actual silver. So like it was, like jewelry almost. So like something that would be like gold, silver, whatever. It was worth, this nowadays would at least buy enough food for the day. But you can buy these old coins on the government mint. And so they're like, to buy a dime, it's $3.75. Not a ton. But again, this is the working poor, and that's kind of how they regulated it. I wish they had never changed our money system in 1964, and we're going to talk more about that. Because that really goes into public policy. The way that money is made and created and printed really is how the U.S. is able to fund massive wars in other countries, some of the social service programs and some of the things that we do. And it really was because in 1964, we stopped giving away money in dimes of silver or quarters. And that was 1964. In the Great Depression, we stopped giving away, as you know, gold used to be a $20 bill. So an ounce of gold was 20 bucks. So they stopped doing this during the Great Depression because, again, they had the gold $20. You still can buy these, but they're like $2,000. So this is what a $20 bill looked like in 1933. It was an ounce of gold, It was like legit 1 full ounce of gold. And then a half an ounce of gold was a $10 bill, and a quarter ounce of gold was a $5 bill. So they stopped doing that in 1933 so that they could fund World War II and get out of the Great Depression. In 1964, we stopped giving. We kept silver money until the 60s. And I don't know how they did that. Once they stopped that, it was just paper money. It was just like print. But this stuff has to be dug out of the ground, mined with like huge machines, and then refined. Like you cook it out. Anybody have gold jewelry? Like it's not cheap anymore, is it? It's like something like this is like $600. You know what I mean? This isn't even gold or silver. But if you bought it in gold, it would probably be like 500. I don't know. So that's what money used to be, and especially in the United States, because they wanted to have honest money. Well, we've gotten rid of honest money since the 1930s. We got rid of gold, and in the 1960s, we got rid of silver. These silver dimes. You still can find them. You still can buy them, but it's about 20 times the face value. Gold. They say gold went from $20 when the U.S. government confiscated it in 1933. They raised the price of an ounce of gold overnight to $30 an ounce. So like that's a 30% increase in money. And it's getting back to, again, public policy because they would pay you what they thought was a fair wage. The Roman Empire collapsed the same way. They stopped putting silver into their money and they started like mixing in copper and bronze and like the cheap stuff in the pennies. And when they started paying Roman soldiers with watered down money in the 400s, that's when the Roman Empire collapsed because they were out of money. Kind of the same way the U.S. is paying people with worthless dollars nowadays. It's very similar. So the workhorse at Workhouse in 1723, the Parliament authorized any parish to establish a workhouse. The major aim. This is like social work in the 1700s. We didn't have any social workers in the U.S. until 1900. This is the same thing, though. It was profitable employment for the poor. The poor produced goods that would earn money for the state. So the major aim of the workhouses was to provide equitable employment for the poor. And I'm going to finish out here as I still wanted to do some of chapters 3 and 4 next week. The workhouse, it included neglected children, able-bodied paupers, aged and impotent persons. So they still even had a value on being able to reproduce and to create life if you were impotent, aged and impotent, maybe weak, mothers who bore children out of wedlock, prostitutes, the blind and mentally ill. So they're lumping them all into this workhouse and making them work. Those who were developmentally disabled, immigrants, vagrants, and criminals. So even from the 1700s, I know history is boring sometimes, but it's supposed to give us a greater understanding of where we've landed on public policy today. They had to find a way to care for these folks that were unable to care for themselves back then. And we still do the same with public policy nowadays. We do it differently, but that's kind of, moving us from 400 to 1700 AD. So we're almost up to the 1900s. I want to get us to modern times and more interesting stuff. Like, did anybody know that used to be a $20 bill? I didn't know until recently. I was like, what? So like you got $100 in your pocket? I mean, that was real money. You know what I mean? And like a $5 bill was one of these smaller. Yeah, there's a $5. either the Liberty coin and now that's how much you got to buy it for. So that's how much it's worth. That was $5 in 1933. And then here's your $20 coin. If you buy one, it's 1,965 instead of $20. So that's an ounce of gold. That's a quarter ounce of gold. If you buy a $10 one, it's a half an ounce of gold. But in order to pay for public policy, the U.S. government changed the way that we made our money and gave it to people. We actually almost bankrupted before we did this because some of the other countries that would hold U.S. reserves started saying, all right, dude, I got $1,000 of U.S. reserves. Now send over that 50 ounces of gold. And if we had to do that in 1971, when we canceled the policy entirely, we would have been so bankrupt, we would have had no money to do anything in the United States. So they switched it over to paper dollars. Oh, there's a $2.50. So that's like your $2 bill, but that would have been not a quarter of an ounce, but like 1.2, 12.5. So money policy changed to fund actual policy. So that's all I got. You guys got any questions? To fund some of these things, it's definitely expensive. I'm just thinking, does anybody know what the U.S. debt currently is at?
I didn't know what was going up every day. I mean, it's like every second.
Right, yeah. You've seen the U.S. debt clock? Right. So, like, if you look that up. So this is just something to, if you ever have a chance to take a look at. It just kind of shows you in real time what's going on with our debt. So. I think that's why they quit giving out $20 bills and actual gold. And it's cool. It shows the breakdown, like what it pays for and all the different policies that are being paid for from our tax dollars. A lot of it is, there's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. The big one is war right there. We have 330 million in the U.S. So anyway, just something to think about. I know these are concepts that are really far out here and you guys will want to take a nap, but I want you to have all this info. It gives you that bigger understanding, just like life. Just like, dude, how is that? How are we going to pay that one off? And then 4 years ago, I think it was only at 18 or 16. So it's gone up to 27 trillion in 4 years. 8 years before that, it was only at 8 trillion and it doubled to 16 trillion. And I think Clinton, the last president that balanced our debt to zero was Bill Clinton in like the 1990s, supposedly. So this is what pays for our policy. I just wanted you guys to kind of get an understanding of it. And email if you have any questions. Feel free to check in whenever you need to. Have a good one. Have a good weekend, everybody. All right, see ya.
growing and growing.
I know, it's so insane. Like, it's like literally $1 million every minute. It goes up about $1 million.
How's somebody even allowed to have that much debt? Like, so the whole United States is allowed to have this much debt, but if you have so much debt in your house, like you just take it away. Okay, that makes sense.
And
I
we
don't get how
only
they just can't erase it. Like, who's the debt? Who are they in debt with?
so there is supposedly like Saudi Arabia's bought like $1 trillion worth of U.S. debt. China has bought $1 trillion worth of U.S. debt. So there are other countries that buy our bonds and treasuries. That's even hard for me to understand. It's like confusing, but like.
But and our money is worth. I mean, our value is higher than theirs, right?
Yeah, our
So wouldn't
dollar
it
is
be
still the
easier?
world reserve currency. That's what it's considered. Is the world.
So why they just don't pay them back? Like, you don't.
Why the U.S. you said just like actually some of them have noticed the dollar has been kind of crashing like this, so they actually sold off our actual dollar. So I think Saudi Arabia might have sold off half of that last year, and then even Russia now holds more gold than paper dollars. So some of them are going back to gold and doing a gold standard for like their base currency.
Or
Hmm.
it don't even make sense.
It is very confusing. I wish I was an economics major to explain all this, but I know in social policy it's important to understand how we're funded. You know, like how do we pay for all of those checks we got last year? Everybody got a little bit of
I
money.
mean, I hope they don't expect us to help with that one.
Right, right, yeah,
I mean, this stuff down here is reasonable.
right.
The fence where who are we on war with? Why do we need so much money?
That is crazy, yeah, because the last 4 years is the first time in 4 years we've not created a new war. We've taken some of the troops home, but we've been like Syria and Afghanistan's gone on for 20 years. Iraq has gone on. They're still kind of going on. There's still troops over there. Japan, I guess ever since World War II, they're not allowed to have an army. Germany and Japan. So the U.S. actually is the army in Germany and Japan, which is weird. That's a lot of freaking money.
Yeah, that's wild.
I know. I wish I could explain this better to you guys. I'm not that smart though.
I don't think they would be able to explain it.
Right.
They weren't there.
Yeah, somebody's got to explain it, right?
Yes.